Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's coverlet of comfort video. Before I get into what we're going to do this week, I just wanted to show you my homework because last week we looked at some pieces in this book of Boro, and we're going to look at a couple of others in a little minute. We looked at some of them twice. If you watch the video later, you won't have seen bits twice, but when I uploaded it, I'd made a mistake in the editing, for which many apologies, and I'd repeated a section, because when I edit, I do the close-up bits, and for some reason there was one section in close-up, and then it was there again without close-up. I don't know what I did. But anyway, I didn't know that I could edit once videos were live on YouTube, but I worked out how to do it, so I was quite pleased with myself, pat on the back. Took me a while and managed to remove the repeated section. So hopefully I'll do better this week, but you know, you didn't mind, I know you didn't mind, but it was a chance to learn a new skill, so yeah, it was all good. So anyway, what I've done is, like I said, I just carried on doing what I did with you last week, but a bit more of it. Now I've by no means covered the whole piece. I don't remember what I did last week and what I did in the week. But I'll just give you a general idea of the density of the stitching, or lack thereof. There's no right or wrong, you know. If you've gone ahead and gone mad and done loads of stitching, that's fine. There's no, you know, do 3 patches here and that. It's just, you know, whatever. So I've done some outline stitching around these odd shapes just to highlight them. I do think I did that new. I mostly used, oh, excuse me, I mostly used the white or off-white vintage darning thread that I was using before. I left my knots on the front visible as well, because we saw that in the book. Here where the seam line was worn on this piece that had been in a patchwork, I stitched around the seam line. It just felt like a nice thing to do. I think I turned a couple of other edges under, like I did with you. Here I turned this little edge under. I did some quite dense stitching on these little tiny areas. I did some stitching on the strips. I did 3 lines of stitching around this seam of the wrong side of this patch that had been used in something else. Yeah, so you can get a general idea of how much. You see the white stitching, that was all that I did. I also played with varying my stitching length to kind of, as a nod to the pieces, the original pieces may have been mended by different hands who had different stitch sizes. So here you see I've got quite big stitches, and here I've got more tiny stitches, and these are more my normal stitch length, you know, when I just stitch without concentrating. So yeah, so we've got fred hair, of course we have. So that's where I'm at. So this week I'm going to do some patching on it, as if it was, you know, as if some years have gone by and it's worn out and it needs patching. This is also an opportunity. Those of you who I've seen in the Facebook group, a few of you have talked about the colour of this compared to the colour of the rest of your coverlet, and you feel it's too dark or it's too blue or whatever. The first thing I would say is don't worry about that, because you really can't tell until you get everything else going on around it. The ones I saw in the Facebook group, I thought they looked absolutely beautiful. There was one that the maker said that she thought it was too dark, but to my mind it picked up the little dark elements in the other areas. But anyway, and in the new year I will be doing some more videos still on the coverlet of comfort when we finished it, talking about, you know, things like that and what you can do and what I might do to mine, and, you know, going forward. So just don't worry about it. That's an order. Yeah, so I'm going to do patching, like I said, as if it needs mending. It's some years later and it needs mending. And I'm also going to do something which is not, you don't really see in Boro, but we're inspired by, and the whole theme of this really is taking the inspiration from the Boro of valuing all the little scraps, you know, because the cloth was so precious. And I talked last week about motainai, and I said that it is the idea that every little thing is precious and not to be wasted, and it's even got an element within that word. You can't translate it into English as just one word, I don't think, of regret over waste. It's almost like if a little piece of something is wasted, that it hurts your heart in a sense, you know, at the idea of the waste. So it's really quite a deep concept. Anyway, so all that being said, the one thing that we do in mending, or another thing that we do in mending apart from patching, is darning, often with a wool or a knit fabric. But I like to do little surface darns just as decorative elements. We did some on the, I think it was the fauna blocks with the Cantha inspired animals. So I think I'm going to do some darning on this as well, just as a nod to that spirit of mending, you know, of motanai, of not wasting. So this week, yes, patching and mending. So before I start that and show you what I've picked out of my scraps, I'll just show you in the book here again. I've just marked two places where it's quite apparent. So if you look here at this one, you see that you've got the kind of the blues in the background, but then these stripy sections, it's very clear that they've been patched on afterwards. This one here is crossing a seam between two other patches. This one here is crossing the seam, but you see they're sitting on the surface. So there's obviously been holes or wear or of some kind, and a patch has just been applied, and you see there's the same cloth here used in several places, this blue and stripy blue across here, a little bit up there as well, and on this is the same piece but a broader view, I think, not sure. But you see that these are definitely patches on the surface. So I'm going to do some of that, and I'll just show you the other one as well. And on this more in close-up, you can see here these beige colours. Now this here, you'd see that if you imagined when it was all blue, although there is some beige there behind the blue, so that was maybe patched over the top, that you can change the balance of the colour just now with your patches by introducing another colour in your patches. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm quite happy with the colour of mine being blue, but I have got my flora and fauna blocks next to it with the cream background, so I thought it would be nice to do some cream patches on my Boro inspired piece, just to bring in that element. So you can maybe look at your own coverlet and where you're going to put your Boro piece in relation to the other pieces, and maybe take a view. If you're happy with it being blue, you can just absolutely patch in blue on the top. So it's a little bit also an exercise in, now I'm going to cover up work that I've already done, because that's building the layers. So I am going to cover some of my stitching that I've done, partially. So before I start that, I'll just show you what I've got. So I've been through my scraps. So I've got this bit of, this is some linen. This was a vintage pinny, a vintage apron. And the main body of it, I think I used it, well, I know I used it in the rust and tea dyeing video way back when I was still in France. It was a piece of cloth that I rusted and tea dyed. And I think I used the cloth in my journal for last year, my stitch journal for the weekly project. But it's got here a little monogram, PP. So I thought it might be nice to get this little area out with the PP and use that as a patch. So I want to get that out of there. I've got this beautiful raggedy little hanky that was in a box that Barbara sent me. I used a little piece of Barbara's in the mosaic last month. Was that last month? I think so. You know, the little squares. And in that same box was this hanky, which is so, you know, I mean, most people would have thrown that in the bin. Barbara sent it to me knowing that I would appreciate it, and I absolutely do. And it's perfectly clean. I know it looks grubby, but it's perfectly clean and lovely. But yeah, it's definitely seen better days, you might say. But it's got these wonderful holes in it. So I thought, and it's very thin, you can almost see my hand through it. So, you know, I encourage you, if you don't already, to see the beauty in cloths like this. You know, the life that it's lived, the noses that it's wiped, and so on. So, and like here, there's a hole. Maybe I'll even take that little bit, maybe some of the stripe. So I'm thinking if I patch with some of that, then I can darn the patch So that was my thinking with that, rather than making holes, you know, this has already got the holes in. And then I've just chosen some other sort of neutral coloured scraps. I think that was tea-dyed linen. That is Osnaburg, which is cotton weave, a looser weave, tea-dyed. This is some scrim that's been tea-dyed. So that's very fine, because you don't want it to get really thick. You know, I said when we built up our piece to think about using thinner cloths. And I'll talk when you're patching about, you know, you can choose kind of aesthetically where you want the patch to be, but you can also choose not to put your patches over areas that are already thick. So it's listen to the cloth again. Got this little stripy bit because there were stripy pieces in the one I showed you in the book. This is a bit of my old gardening pinny. I think I used some of it in the background somewhere as well. Did I? Don't remember. Anyway, but it's also got this lovely big hole, so I thought I could use this section. And I've got this, which came from Vicky, I think. It's a bit of old quilt. Now it has got some very thin wadding, or batting if you prefer, in the middle. And so I wouldn't want to, it's quite thick, you know, to put it as a patch like that. But what I wanted to try and do, because you can see the hand stitching in it, is get some of it away and just gently snip on the back somehow, if I can manage it, so that the stitching stays in the surface. Now obviously if I cut the stitches they'll be loose, but I'm hoping that little bits of them will remain, because it's lovely. If I just took a little square like that, it's a little 9 patch. And that's another bit of old quilt, that's part of an old crazy quilt. I might use some of that. That's got a sort of almost paisley pattern on it, and again it's just lovely and fine and soft. Was it piece by hand? It's always interesting looking at these old pieces. I think it was piece by hand, and then someone's been making a crazy patchwork. But I just think it's better to use these pieces. Oh, here, look, we'll use this section. If I use this section here, I've got the original seam. Look at the tiny stitching in that seam. Look how tiny that is. Do you know, I might even use that way up. And then they've overcast the edge of the seam as well. Oh, that's so beautiful. I think I might use that little bit so that you see that. You see the history of the piecing in that part there. But yeah, I think it's better that we use these pieces in our work. The same with the vintage, you know, the tablecloths and all that, rather than, you know, what else would you do with it? I don't think it's wrong to use it, to tear it up and use it. I think it's honouring it, motanai. And then finally I've got this that I want to include. Now someone sent me this, I don't know who it was, so if it was you, please tell me and remind me. This is, I'm pretty sure it's a Jude Hill patch. You know Jude Hill, Spirit Cloth, who I learnt the invisible base from, among a million other things. And she does these beautiful indigo resists, often with circles, moons. But this is a little heart. And I've had a look through I keep all the cards that you send me when you send me things. But I can't for the life of me remember who sent me that, but I'm fairly sure in the note it said that it was a Jude patch. So yeah, I definitely want to, and it's indigo, so I definitely want to include that in this piece. So that's my, oh yeah, and then thread. So yeah, also in the spirit of motanai, I mean I did use the vintage thread before, but for this I've gone through my Tangly Orts basket, on my little thread ends, and I've pulled out some sort of neutralish colours. There's another bit there. So I want to try and use, you know, these little leftover scraps as well. I love that bit. I can go on forever pulling bits out. That bit's quite white. It's a bit too white. Anyway, I think I've got enough to be going on with. So let's make a start with that lovely little piece that I just found here, this. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is just get a patch of it. Now this here is selvage, but it's very thin. It's not a problem, you know, it's not like some modern cloth selvages. You want to get them off because they're really thick. And you can see the little knot there at the beginning of that very fine running stitch, and I definitely want this hole. So I'm going to cut it, dear Henry, maybe somewhere there. I'm going to try and tear it very carefully, and if it won't tear, no, I'm going to cut it. I could see straight away that it was going to tear in the other direction, and I think I'm going to, on some of my patches I'm going to turn the edges under, and on some I'm going to put them on raw edge, you know, just au fur et à mesure. That's French for, what's that French for? You know, I don't know how you say that in English anymore. You see what you're doing as you go along. What's the expression? So I'm just going to cut a piece. Probably a rectangle rather than a perfect square. I'm now trying to think what's English for fur et à mesure. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So that's super wonky. I might actually cut that bit off now, that selvage. I know I said it didn't matter, but now that it's, I'm just going to try not to cut off that little knot. Okay, so we've got this. So I want it this way up so that I can see that lovely stitching. So now I'm just going to basically play about and see where I might want it. Just audition it. And I want to put it somewhere where it will overlap some other patches. So it's obvious that it's been applied later, if that makes sense. So I could put it there. That is quite nice. Maybe a bit further. I in general don't like things to line up when I'm doing this kind of thing, so I think I'll just put it there. And what I might do is turn that edge under. Let's get some little pins involved. I might turn that edge under. I'm just being careful because I've got this seam here, although it's very fine cloth, but still it is extra, you know, it's thicker, and here there's the seam in this, so I wouldn't want to put them seam over seam. So I'm taking the decision to offset that a little bit. Yeah, I don't want to turn, do I? Just wondering if that's going to be too bulky if I turn all the edges under. I think that's okay. I'm going to turn all the edges under. I mean, you can, some of my patches I'm probably going to do raw edge. You can just decide as you go along which you want to do. And you can be as finicky as you like with the corners, that's up to you. I'm going to be not very finicky. Turn it again. Well, I've just been this morning down to the opticians, finally. I've been saying it for I don't know how long. Probably since I came back to England, so over a year. I wasn't due because I had my eyes tested in France, and you know, in France they said every 2 years, and actually they said here as well every 2 years, so that was fine. And it's just coming up to the 2 years, so I'm, you know, in time. But I'm just going to poke that in a bit because it's sticking out in a way that's not pleasing me very much. But they said that my eyes were significantly better than the prescription. And they said it is possible that my eyes have improved. But yeah, one of them was, you know how it goes in, like my eyes are 3 point something, I'm short-sighted. And I think one was 3.25 and it's gone to 3. So that's an improvement of 0.25. And the other one was 3.75 and it's gone to 3.25, so that was an improvement of 0.5, which is quite a lot. So anyway, I've got new glasses, and I've paid a bit extra to have anti-glare, because I don't know in other countries. Now you have to tell me if you sympathise. Here in the UK, in fairly recent years, they have made headlights with LED, so they're really white light. And I do find sometimes at night going round these little lanes here, which are, you know, pitch black, there's no street lighting or anything, that they really dazzle you sometimes. And I've heard that it's us with older eyes that are more susceptible to it. So yeah, so I've paid for this anti-glare. It wasn't much more, I think it was only £10 more per lens or something. So hopefully that will have an improvement, because it's awful when you think you don't want to go out driving after dark, which at this time of year is 5 o'clock, because of being dazzled by the headlights of the oncoming cars on the wrong side of the road, although here it's obviously not the wrong side of the road. Right, that's already got a knot in that end, so I'll thread it from this end. That's just 2 strands of floss. I just chose it more or less at random. Right, the end of the thread was super fluffy from being in the aught, so I cut it off again. Here's a little tip you won't be able to see, but I should have shown you. If you're struggling to thread your thread, one thing you can do when you trim is trim under a slight angle, like a 45-degree angle. It does seem to help a little bit sometimes. Right, so we've got that. So I'm just going to start again. I'm going to just have my knot on the front. Let's get rid of that first pin, go through that corner. And you don't at this point have to stitch right through if it's too thick, as long as you stitch it to the surface. That's fine. And I think I'm probably only going to put maybe, I'm ashamed to stitch next to that beautiful tiny stitching with my stitches now look huge and my stitches aren't that big. I think I'm going to, yeah, sorry, finish your sentence, Catherine. I think I'm going to maybe do, I don't know, 5 or 7, something like that, of patches. I'm just going to see as I go. Well, you'll see at the end. I don't need to tell you in advance. But you know, yours can be different. You can do just keep stitching until you think it's good. And next week there'll be more stitching. We've got one more week after this week. Next week we'll be kind of, you know, stitching the background spaces that haven't been stitched yet, if we want to. I inclined to not leave anywhere unstitched. That's just me. But you saw in the samples in the book that I showed you that the stitching is actually quite minimal in a lot of those pieces. It's not that very dense stitching, but we're inspired by it. We're absolutely free to, you know, do our own thing. So I'm going to do more stitching, and you can decide whether you want to or not, and that will be next week. So I'm just going around the edge of this little beautiful patch and thinking about the person that pieced this originally, the tiny stitches that they've done, but also that they took the time to overcast stitch their seam. I don't know how old that is. I don't know if Vicky knows, if it's something she picked up thrifted, or if it's, you know, if she knows more about its history. Vicky, if you're watching, maybe you could tell us, if you want to, if you remember. I'm feeling that I need to do very teeny tiny neat stitches now because of that. So yeah, so like I said, if you want to, you can't obviously you change the whole colour unless you patch the whole thing, but you can definitely make it appear lighter if you put more light patches on it. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about it maybe later, but if you look at where you're positioning them, if you've got big areas that are very dark, you could put a couple of lighter patches, you know, in that area. But otherwise I think it is quite nice as well to put, if you like where I'm using these lighter patches, I've put them where there is already a lighter colour in the background, because then they kind of, I don't know, bed in more. I mean, I want them to look like they're applied later, but you don't want them standing out like the proverbial sore thumb, or I don't. But the best way is to, you know, move them around until you're happy with the placement. And just bear in mind the thickness, like I said, if you don't have such super fine cloth as this, if you've only got thicker, more you know, newer cloth. It's poking out again. See, that was giving me trouble from the beginning. Just turn it under with the needle. I don't mind if it's wibbly wobbly at all, but I didn't really want it poking out. There we go. This needle is not a number 9, I think it's, oh, I think it's one of the ones that Jenny sent me. It's one of the 100-year-old ones that I normally use for piecing. a little bit thin for this, which is why it's struggling here and there. Never mind, we're nearly there. Yes, I'm liking that very much. Now I want to darn this little area. Now I don't think I'm going to do a full darn on it because I kind of still want to see I just love the frayedness of it. So rather than do a full darn, just change into a number 9. I think I am going to just do some kind of like an open darn. I'll show you what I mean. Make a knot again. Of course you don't have to knot, I don't know if I mentioned that last time, you could just do a couple of back stitches on the spot. So again, turn it again. So I'm going to just, where that worn area is, now I'm going very close to those lovely tiny stitches. I'm just going to do a couple of, or a few rows of running stitch over that worn area until I'm into more solid cloth. And the same way that I did, you know, here, I'm not going to worry about trying to hide where I jump my thread over or anything. I'm just going to go where I need to go on the surface if that's where I end up, you know, if I end up on the surface. If I end up on the back, I'll just jump over on the back. So it's more kind of solidifying the area. You know, when we darn, I'll do a darn in a minute, or in a bit. You do long strands and then weave through them. This is more just doing the two perpendicular rows of stitching. Just to, it's almost like you're putting another warp and weft over the whole. Only I'm going to do it wider apart. You can probably hardly see. And apologies, of course I do have to keep turning it because I'm not ambidextrous. And there's no reason why you have to use toning thread. If you wanted to use a contrasting thread, you absolutely could. I just wanted it to be more subtle in this case. I think one more, because I'm just into the more solid area. But I do think I just want to do one more. One more row. Maybe not the whole way across. Maybe I'll stop there, maybe one more place and then I'll stop. So that's brought me into line with the hole coming from this direction. Look up, I'm showing you something if you've gone back to your crochet or your knitting or your stitching. Yeah, so I've stopped here, so now I'm going to stitch this way. So I chose to stop there because here's the hole and this will take me just through the very edge of this solid, more solid cloth. It's not really solid at all, but you know what I mean. So and I'm just going to do the same thing going in the other direction. And this, doing things like this, is just my happy place. I mean, I love all the stitching, but you know, there's always some things we love more than others, isn't there? And doing little darns and little mends with really old worn cloth that other people have stitched into before is one of my favourite things to do. Yeah, so I hope it's not making me go, don't look anymore, look down and then look back at your work so you don't see me twisting and turning and it doesn't make you dizzy. And it's just enough to solidify to some degree that little worn bit. Do my extra stitch on the front and there we go. So that is one little patch. Now I'm not going to do any stitching on here for now, but I might later. But yeah, I'm very, very happy. That makes me unbelievably happy, that does. Little things, what do they say about little things pleasing little minds? But that's mean, so we don't say that. Right, so let's have a look at, where's my bit of pinny? A bit of pinny that had this nice big hole in. So I want this hole basically and some cloth around it, obviously, otherwise it would be literally nothing. Do they sell donut holes still? When we lived in Canada when I was a child, you used to be able to buy donut holes from, was it Dairy Queen? Or was, I was very young, so it might have been near Dairy Queen. It's a shop called Dairy Queen. They did ice cream and milkshakes and things, I think. I was 8, so... but I do think you used to be able to get bags of donut holes. Now, I don't know. I think at the time I thought that they made the donut whole, I mean W-H-O-L-E, entire, complete, and then they punched out the hole to make the hole. And then they sold the bit that they punched out in little bags. But it's very possible that they just made the donuts with a mould with a hole in it already, and then they just made these little round things and sold them as donut holes because they were the size of a donut hole. If you know, please tell me. Right, so there I've got that, which tore so easily. Okay, I'm going to... no, I'm going to keep that a little bit on, I think. So now it needs to find a home. So I'm just going to have a little look-see-look-see-loo. Now that hole is a definite hole, but I'm going to darn over it so you won't really see what's behind it. You do tend to, well I do, get a bit precious about what you're covering up, because I've bonded with this, you know, I've put work into it, and there are areas of it that I love, and I won't want to cover those up. That's perfectly normal. Don't force yourself to cover up areas if you don't want to. If there's something that's particularly pleasing you. I mean, like I love this graduated, and this is the vintage kimono cotton, a little scrap of red, and my dad's pyjamas. So I wouldn't put that over all that, although I do like seeing the red through. So maybe, baby, I'll put it somewhere else where there's red that I'm less precious about. Maybe here. Now it's in line with that. I've got a real thing about not having things in line, or I can turn it like that. That's in line there. Well, I could just have it like that. It doesn't matter if you see a bit of each behind. It's maybe even nice. And it's covering up some of that stitching, but that's okay. And it's right next to the one I've just done. Do I mind that? I don't think so, because I'm going to do some more. I mean, I'll just keep patching it until I think it's, until I'm happy with it, or I've done enough. Yeah, I am thinking that's a bit too in line with that, so I think I will look for somewhere else. I've got this other bit of red here. I'm not as precious about that area, although I do like it. Yeah, I quite like that, And it's just covering that edge, but you can just see that stitching poking out. Shall we go for there? Maybe slightly higher. That covers nearly all of that red. No, let's leave a bit of that red peeping. Let's do it there. So this one, I'm going to leave it raw edge because the edges are just yummy. So I'm just going to pin it on as is. In a few places, not around the edge or anything, I just need to hold it in place. But this bit of cloth is super fragile. You saw, if you were looking, how easily I tore it, even though it's linen, because it was already quite worn when I got it. It was a vintage French night dress that I got on a brocante, and then I modified it. I put pockets on it, I took the waist in because it was, very wide, and put ties on it, and then I eco-printed it. No, first of all I think I rust printed it, and then I eco-printed it later, and then I patched it and I mended it, but I wore it in the garden and it got washed a lot because it got filthy, and I was out in the hot sun and all the rest of it, so it got a lot of wear and a lot of washing, and eventually I just couldn't mend it anymore. It just kept, it just was disintegrating, so that's why I'm now using it. Using the cloth from it. So again, I'm just going to stitch around the edge wherever the edge might happen to be, just really to hold it on to start with. So I'm just going to follow, just staying maybe 3 or so threads inside the fray, just to anchor it down. Okay, so I stitched all the way around the edge. I even stitched around these little sticky out bits just to make sure everything was trapped down, but it is very fragile, so I'm going to darn this area first, and then I probably will do some more stitching on the rest of it just to hold it down, a little bit along the same lines of what I did on the other piece where the little hole was. So on this one I am going to do actual darning, so I am going to come through from the back, I think. Before I start the darning I'm going to do a little circle of tiny running stitches, as small as I can, not as small as the person on that other one, but my best, all the way around the edge, just to stabilise the hole and kind of just give a sturdy foundation for me to do my weaving back and forward stitches into. So I'm not going to trim anything because I like all that fluff, and I'm not going to do a solid darn like you would in a sock or something, because I want some of the red to poke through, but I just want to be sure before I start that the edges are secured. And you could, of course, and that's maybe something else I might do, just do this and leave the hole. So it's kind of a very rough version of reverse applique. You can see when I've done this how it looks, but there's no reason why you can't do that as well, because you stitched the edge of the patch down. This is an edge of the patch, it's just an internal edge, so you know, if you have a patch with a hole and you stitch it on like that, you can absolutely just leave the hole. I'm looking at it now and I really love it. I don't think I want to do the darn here. I think I am going to leave it like that. I'm going to leave it like that for now. And that is, there's no harm in changing your mind when you see, you know, when you see how it looks. But I do want to do a darn with you. So we're going to have to do another one. That's alright. We've got more options. I had that lovely hanky from Barbara with a hole in it, several holes in it. We wanted this piece here. Now I don't know if I'm going to be able to tear this. Let's get one. Actually, I might use that somewhere else as a patch, but I want a kind of a hole, you know, a definite hole. Let's do this one here. I'm going to just cut it because I think I'm going to turn the edges under because it's so thin. So it doesn't matter if it's cut. It's so soft, this cloth, it's beautiful. Takes all sorts, doesn't it? Some people prefer all crisp, pristine, lovely cloth fresh off the bolt, and I prefer this. Alright, there we go. So there's my little bit with a hole. Obviously it could do with an iron. Obviously I'm not going to iron it. I'm going to find somewhere to put it. Maybe here. Maybe like that. Over there. I mean, there's no stitching hidden, but that's alright. We don't have to deliberately hide stitching if we think it's... Let's put it that way up because the red is, that's the right side, so the red's a bit more prominent. So again, I'm going to just do the same thing as before. I'm going to turn the edges under just a tiny bit and pin it. You don't need to watch me do that again. Okay, so I've finished stitching around the edge, very wonkily, but that's fine. Now with using the same thread I've just worked my way through the layers, and I'm just going to do again the little tiny stitches just around the edge. You don't have to do that, you could go straight into the darn because it's stabilised by the undercloth, but I just feel like doing it. It's just what I do when I darn socks or, you know, jumpers or things like that. I don't think I always do it when I'm doing decorative darns on cloth, but I feel like doing it today. There we go. So now I'm going to come up just outside that stitch line and just so I'm just again just going to cross the good, you know, the solid cloth just above the hole. And getting a knot in the thread is not what you want. So I'm just going to jump across And then I like to just take the tiniest possible stitch on the other side. Don't pull it too tight, and then jump back. Just staying just outside that, so you're covering those running stitches up. And if you were darning socks or a jumper or something, those little stitches around the edge would give you a little sort of a scaffolding to build your darn against. And I'm not bothering if I'm wonky or not. I'm just basically aiming to get a little mesh over that hole. Now what I would do then, if I was going to do a really nice tight darn, is then go back the other way and come up in the gaps and put in another you know, another lot of these long stitches. But I don't think I am. I think I'm going to just go through there, and I'm just going to do the weaving just now and just leave it quite open and kind of rudimentary. So I'm going to turn it so I'm working right to left because I'm right-handed. Now I'm going to use the eye of the needle, and I've got 2 strands of floss, so it's pretty straightforward here because all the strands are separate, but if you have all the strands bunched up together, it is sometimes quite hard to see with 2 strands of floss to make sure that you get, you know, both strands every time and don't get one strand with its neighbour and all that kind of thing. So just bear that in mind. It's maybe handier if you're doing darning and you want it to be really tight to use, well, either do it really fine with 1 strand of floss or use, you know, a pearl cotton or something. So I'm going to just come across in a straight line and go through to the back. I usually do go through and then come back up again because I can get it closer together that way. Now you see that I've got some of the ends of the long stitches undone, so I am just going to come back outwards and just go through those once more. And now here I want to go under where I went over and over where I went under. Again with the eye of the needle. I just love darning. And that first strand, there's none of it showing, so I'm just going to stop short, that's fine. And then shoot through to the back, and then I need to jump all the way over there so I can do that in one go. Untwist the thread, it does tend to get a bit twisty. And then I'm going to come back the other way. I'm going looking, I was over, so I need to go under, under, over, under, over. And if you struggle to get under, sometimes it's easier to go higher up the strand and then sort of swipe your needle down. And again, it's important to not pull it too tight in this case because it will pucker. Because, you know, there's a long strand there, although it's woven, it's still a long strand without, it's not anchored to the cloth along its length. And again, that final strand was shorter, but that doesn't matter, I don't have to go through it if I don't want to. Well, there we go. So that is quite an open weave darn. And if I'd gone down, and I might do later on another closer together one, but if I'd gone and put the extra strands through in both directions, it would have been much denser. But you know, I quite like the look of that, and I quite like the idea of having them different. I might even do one with only 1 strand and finer. If you saw my Stitch Meditation scroll video a few weeks ago, you'll have seen my scroll with all the vintage darns from the old French sheets, and those are all different, you know, because they're all done by different hands. So some are really fine and some are more rustique, as they say in France. Rustique, rustic, same word. So I'm going to go away and do some more of the same. I love this one, and I love this one, and I love this one. I love them all. I'm going to go away and do a few more, and then I'll be back to show you what I've done. And if I've come up with anything different, obviously I'll talk you through it, okay? So I'll be back in no time flat for you. Okay, it's evening, so it's now artificial light, so I hope the lighting change isn't disturbing. I've done quite a lot. I'll just talk you through it briefly. Before I do, I'll insert here a little handheld scan close-up of all the bits, so you can see what I've done. Okay, I hope that I can make sure there's no shadows. This is a little close up, but I thought I'd talk as well for a change. I'll talk in more detail in a minute when I'm sitting back down again, but that's the patch from Jude there. What else is new here? Oh, there's a piece of the hanky, and there's some scrim, little darn, which I'll talk about at the end. I've actually already filmed the whole of the rest of it, and yeah, spoiler alert, I nearly forget the darn, but I showed you here. I've got, excuse, my hair is getting in the way, sorry about that. Oops, and that's the patch I did with you. And down here that's a darn I did with you, and sorry, I'm not going to go too quickly. And then right down here at the bottom is the little patch with the monogram from the old pinny. So there we go, bit of wobbly handheld. So now back to me sitting down and telling you in more detail what I did. Okay, so I've thought about which way up it's going, because I had this little patch, the Jude Hill heart, and it's going to go vertically this way down the side of my piece. So I've put the heart so it will be the right way up. So, you know, if you've got any elements that have got an orientation, it's just something to think about. So all I did was I've simply stitched that on around the edge, and then I did another little line of stitching around the heart itself. And I probably will do something else to it, because I find that it stands out quite a lot. Probably because it's a thing, you know, it's something, it's an object, and everything else is just abstract shapes. So what I might do is, I haven't got a little scrap of cloth standing by because it's in the other room, is, you know, just maybe put a little patch over one corner of it or something like that, just so it's not floating quite as much. So in that case, the idea of it being plonked on afterwards is a bit too floaty. Hope that makes sense. So here's my little stripy patch. I just turned the edges under, and I've just done a running stitch around the edge. That I did with you. This bit of scrim, I've just done a running stitch around the edge, but I will need to do more stitching on it because it'll be too fragile otherwise, but that's for another time. This little piece of that hanky that I showed you, I did running stitches going quite close together and quite small because it was so fragile, so I've really stitched it heavily and now it's kind of embedded into this bit of flannel underneath. And then the little pieces, the raggedy pieces that are sticking out this way, I did some stitching going in the other direction, and because I was using my threads, they ran out and I changed colour, but I like that. That's, you know, that's part of it for me. That shows that you're using little leftover bits, and also it might suggest, and later on I meant it to suggest, that you did some stitching at one time and then the other stitching at a future date, so obviously you've got a different colour thread. So that's another little layer of the storytelling. I talked about that one I did with you. This is the piece of the quilt. I did manage to get the wadding out, or get it apart, and I have lost some of the stitches here and there, but and you probably can't see, but hopefully you could see on the close-up scan that I do still have some of the little stitches showing, the original stitches, and I didn't go for the full square in the end. It just was too much, and at the moment it's just held on with running stitch around the edge, but I will be doing more stitching into it as well next week possibly. So that was that one. Did I do that one with you? Yes, that's the darn I did with you, wasn't it? Oh, and this was another piece of that hanky, and again it was that worn area on the corner that I nearly chose for the darn and then changed my mind. So I just did a line of running stitch around the edge just to attach it, and then I started going small stitches in both directions over this really worn area in the grey, and then the grey ran out, so then I changed to the brown, and then I did some more little stitches going in both directions over this area that's slightly less worn but still very thin. So again, it's to look as if this area was darned, you know, this area broke first and was mended, and then sometime later this area started going, so then that was mended in a different colour. So again, adding those layers of storytelling. And then finally I've got my little monogram PP have no idea what it stands for. And I've just stitched that on there, a rectangular piece. So that's me for this week. Oh no, I left the best till last and I nearly forgot to show it to you. Well, the best in my opinion. There it is. It's a little darn. I used one strand of floss. There was a little hole in this piece of old quilt. I used one strand of floss and I just did a little darn on the surface. Exactly the same way that I did that bigger darn with the 2 strands of floss there. But you see the difference when you just go down one strand, how fine it is. And I did it closer together. And I'm definitely going to be doing more of those of different sizes. I'll probably do that through the week, just because I love doing it. I'm not going to darn that because I just love that red showing. And there I had a hole. I don't know that I've got any other holes. I'll have a look. But otherwise I will just do them on the surface as if there was a hole there. You know, that's fine. I'm not worried about that. So I think for this piece that's probably enough in terms of the patches, apart from I might stitch another bit of, I might use some gauze or something just over this, maybe here or somewhere, just to make that feel more integral to the whole thing. I'll do a few more darns and I might do some more stitching on some of these that are a bit fragile. But that's it for this week, and then next week, final week, I'll look at doing some more stitching in the areas that aren't yet stitched. So I hope that's good. I hope you enjoy that. I'm absolutely loving this piece. Absolutely loving working on it. I'm, you know, thinking, oh, I need to do more of this. I need to do this more often with all the other 1,000,001 things I've got on the go. But yeah, so I've got this piece to work on for now. Don't need to get ahead of myself. So it just remains to say thank you so much for watching, and lots of love and kisses. And I'll see you next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye.